We ask those who are able to rise. If you are currently serving in the military, you may perform the hand salute, or if you've been honorably discharged, you may also.
Dear friends, by the way, Alan and Susan, a very beautiful military ceremony, and he whispered to you, Alan, but the words are something like, on behalf of a grateful nation. I'll begin with words from the prophet Isaiah. As a mother comforts her children, so shall I comfort you, says the Lord. Your sun will set no more, neither will your moon be withdrawn. For the Lord will be your enduring light, and the days of your mourning will come to an end. Bilah hamavet lanetzach. God will destroy death forever. The Lord God will wipe away tears from every face. Amen. A very well-deserved tribute to your father, Myer ben Yaakov Akiva, the Esther. I knew Myer, and it was an honor to know him, and I knew him as a very humble and honest man, very reluctant to ever boast, never heard him boast, very concerned for his children. You felt that. Once in a while he did comment about you, Alan, and your losing your vision. He's a very dear human being. Myer fathered and raised a family, provided his children with the best undergraduate and graduate education that could possibly be afforded, and lost his beloved Marjorie, the love of his life, the mother of his 3 children, Betty, Susan, Alan. And the event of your mother's death was not only life-changing, but a heavy, heavy blow to the family. Myer was a man of character and strength. The well-being of each of his 3 children consumed his thoughts. At the end of his long life, 97 years, almost 98, your father set a sterling example of a man loving, generous, deeply concerned for each of his children, and for his granddaughter Lisa, and for Lisa. In the 4th chapter of part of our Talmud, the famous Masechet Avot, the famous Pirkei Avot, known as the Wisdom or Chapters of the Fathers, Myer's character as a human being, well appreciated, is nicely illustrated. I'll be translating. Rabbi Shimon declared, there are 3 crowns: the crown of Torah, meaning learning, the crown of Kehuna, meaning religious service, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of royalty. But the crown of a good name exceeds them all. It's a very democratic saying in our Talmud, and really illustrates Myer's good name. Myer Spiro was the older of 2, along with his younger sister Hannah, who yet survives in San Francisco. The two were born to Kobe and Esther. Myer was born, as I said, April 20th, 1919, a little over 97 years ago. He graduated the Case Western School of Pharmacy in June of 1941, and we could feel or sense that expectation he had. His father, Kobe, struggled with hardship and the struggle to earn a living from late 1920s, well through the entire 1930s, really until the World War II. Terrible 11, 12 years, terrible years of depression. So that left, as you know, Susan, a lasting mark on your father. Reluctant, careful to spend money kind of mentality, which we can easily forgive. Granted, the hardship of the family. So he could look forward in June of 41 to a life that he would make of his own, where he could truly enjoy a better life than his father had managed. But December 7, 1941, changed all that. Without any pushing, Myer enlisted in the Navy, was selected for officers' training, interesting, at Columbia University, and now develops the charming story of how he encountered your mother and in short order became a husband and later a father with his beloved Marjorie and your beloved mother. So the story you have told is that he was across the street from Columbia at the local drugstore owned by a Jewish man, Nathan Zipper. And Myer may have turned around or in the conversation noticed a really attractive young woman walking the family dog right by the pharmacy. He was startled. He asked Mr. Zipper, "Why, who's that?" Mr. Zipper, the future and proud father-in-law, didn't waste one moment. "That's my daughter," and instantly invited Myer to dinner. That began the process you know so well. 2 years later, in early fall, we believe, or late summer of 1944, they were married. Your mother was all of 19, Myer about 25. Again, this is about 1944. She became your mother in short order. Betty was born really shortly before Myer's discharge from the Army in 1945. You, Susan, and you, Alan, followed. These early years of marriage, really the first 9.5 years of marriage, were undoubtedly the happiest years of Myer's, Marjorie's, and the family's life, of all your lives. Undoubtedly wonderful years bursting with energy and hope. In 1946, after his discharge, Myer decided to return to the city of his origins, Cleveland, Ohio, here, and he established what became a well-known and successful pharmacy, Marvin's. For some reason, he named it Marvin's Drugstore, complete with a soda fountain and so on. And he worked amazingly long hours, possibly with a partner, for 22 years. He would have stayed for 40 years. But sadly, the assassination of Martin Luther King and the terrible days in April in the inner city just simply forced him to abandon the drugstore. But yet before that, tragedy was part of your lives. Barely 10 years passed after their wedding in 44. June 17th, 1954, your mother died of a brain tumor. I'm so sorry to have to read this. A life-changing and tragic blow to the entire family, and certainly to Myer. He had to struggle with that gloom and with that cloud, and the worry of being a decent father and at the same time provide the way he felt he should provide and be an adequate father to his daughters, Betty and Susan. I think Alan was right when he said these thoughts and worries consumed him. I'd like to go to the legacy of Myer. As I mentioned, he was a decent, very Jewishly minded man who was unwilling to see Sabbath Eve at the Wilds, which had become his, you might say, his retirement home, his assisted living, and a very comfortable and welcoming home for him for many years. And his awareness that no Jewish people, not one, volunteered to somehow lead a service, even the shortest of services. Myer was unwilling to see Sabbath Eve silent or ignored. He took over a short service, but actually fairly complete one, 3 weeks of every month for years and years. I was able to come just once a month from Montefiore. Your dad filmed in, without complaint. Susan, you pointed out his generosity as a father, as you have, Alan, as well. In seeing both of you, as I mentioned, really receive and achieve professional careers, professional excellence, both of you. You, Susan, are a remarkably sensitive and delicate human being. You, Alan, you know that you're pretty much, I think, in the mold of your father, and you too have risen in your own legal profession and to a degree of comfort and prosperity. And you had to make your dad very, very proud. Another thing, Susan, you mentioned, in addition to the very intensive 3 times a week Hebrew and Sunday school education at the temple on the Heights, now we know as Congregation B'nai Yeshurun, in addition to those really, what can I say, challenging afternoons, no play and all study. But Myer also brought each of you to the public library every couple of weeks. What a decent idea, and what a nice gesture for a very busy father. You mentioned, Susan, again, how suddenly there were sleds in the garage or sleds at home to enable you and your brother to enjoy sledding at Kane Park. A few years later, you mentioned bicycles appeared at home. Again, Myer really was thoughtful of his children completely. It's fair to say that even though the Depression brought about that feeling of frugality, his generosity to each of you will continue and continue beyond his death. A very happy chapter in Myer's life was provided by a dear friend and dear volunteer, Richard Ostendorf, himself a retired physician. And Richard, you gave countless, hundreds of hours, playing Scrabble. I'm not much at Scrabble because trying to put the J's and Y's together drive me crazy, and I quickly bail out of a game. But Richard, you and Myer, and I saw them every single Monday, were engrossed and absorbed in that game of Scrabble. Of course, Myer enjoyed it because it was wonderful one-on-one relationship, one-on-one friendship, and also helped to keep his mind active. And that was something, again, that you mentioned, Susan. He did crossword puzzles and so on. And we have to say, and Alan, I attribute this to you, that Myer was lucid, comprehending to the last moments of his life. 97 3/4 years. He even retained a little sense of humor. Apparently last Friday night, the two of you came to him in his hospital bed, and you, Susan, very enthusiastically said, "We're here to visit you, Dad." And he said, "Well, I assumed that." Sense of humor right in the last hours. He leaves a precious legacy to each of you. And really, I wanted to complete this and thank you, Richard, for the hours of recreation and enjoyment you gave to Myer. And yes, there is also a beautiful story that Richard tells. At a certain point, they became very candid and very personal, Richard and your father. And your father at one point in a certain conversation said, "Sadly, I leave no legacy. I have no legacy to leave." And he must have been heartbroken to say that. And I'm not sure what went through his mind. And then in that same conversation, after some more sentences and a little more time, Myer spontaneously came to himself and he said, "Well, no, I have a legacy. I leave a legacy. My family, my dear children." He leaves a precious legacy to each of you, to Betty, your dear sister in Washington, D.C., to you and Alan, to Susan and Alan. He leaves a legacy of enduring perseverance, right? We have to say that. The tragic loss of the woman he loved, the upset of that, again, race riot, 20 years later, whatever number of years later. The struggle to be a good father, to be an attentive father, and yet to mind the pharmacy well into the night. A legacy of hard work, which both of you mentioned, and which we believe. He leaves also an inner core of Jewish character, Jewish values, Jewish loyalty, generosity to Israel and to many causes and to many people who must have come to him. The old tradition where the rabbis who were struggling, the yeshiva that needed help would have no compunction about knocking on the doors of Jewish storekeepers or pharmacists. I'm sure Myer had an open hand. And above all, his lifelong efforts to see to the happiness and well-being of his children. I should make this a little more complete. He was also very conscious of family, as busy as he was, and sent cards and gifts to all sides and all dimensions of the family. And the two of you continue to be in nice touch with cousins who are actually your mother's, Marjorie's, grandchildren. In other words, her descendants. I should also mention that Myer loved music. He was a state champion as a saxophonist, worth including. He leaves a large legacy, and Alan and Susan, you were at the center. Of course, with Betty. Would anyone like to add something? Alan, would you be tempted to come up? Just come forward, please. Come forward and then a little around to your right. A little more forward, a little more forward.
About 3 steps and a little more. And now to your
Keep going
right.
forward. Keep going forward.
There you go. Now to your turn
And then
around,
turn around.
semicircle.
The microphone is right here. Come a little more forward to the desk, to the podium.
Oh. Okay, thank you. Rabbi Chazen, thank you for that very complete and very touching and accurate portrait of my father and of his virtues. Everything you said was true. I want to acknowledge people who would have dearly loved to be here today. My father's sister, Hannah. My sister, Betty. Susan's daughter, Lisa. I never saw my father happier. Of course, I never saw him with my mother, but throughout their lives, my father and his sister Hannah had a relationship that was little short of remarkable. When they were together, I have many photos of them together. I have a little album of just the two of them together, and when they were together, their faces glowed. There was a serenity about them that I never saw at any other time. Of course, there was a different kind of happiness with my mother, and big smiles there too. My father was a bit hard to please. I'll never forget calling him from college. It was 1972, and telling him very proudly that I had been accepted to the doctoral program in philosophy at Princeton. And there was a pause, and then the words, "So you're not going to law school?" A number of years later, I called him from Princeton and told him that I was about to enter Harvard Law School. And again, there was a pause, and he said, "So you're not going into business?" He, as Rabbi Chazen said, was not a prideful man, and he certainly did not expect us to be prideful. But what he accomplished during his life, living through the Great Depression, born 1919, so you know that he spent his early teens and life as a young man in great poverty, and managed to get himself through college and pharmacy school, only, as the rabbi said, to be presented with the bombing of Pearl Harbor and joining the Navy, of which he was very proud. And he also said it was the best food he had ever eaten. He was very proud to have been a member of the Navy, and it was wonderful having that military presentation today, and I will treasure that flag. Then, as the rabbi said, he came home, and by the time he arrived home, he first went off to the North Africa for the invasion of Sicily, and was wounded, sent back home for medical leave, married my mother on leave, fathered Betty, this time was sent to the Pacific, and while he was in the Pacific, I have photos of him during the landing on Guam. Betty was born, and he came home to a daughter whose birth he had not witnessed. He did witness Susan's birth and mine, and then when I was 2.5, the death of our mother. And the photos tell quite a story, because in the months before her death, even though my mother was quite ill from an undiagnosed brain tumor, the smiles of everyone were just brilliant. The 3 kids, we were just so happy. And then the photos in the aftermath of her death were a very different picture. Sadness, grief, all around. And it has weighed on us, and it has weighed on him. But as Rabbi Chazen said, perseverance, tenacity. He never, ever failed to provide for us. My mother's mother wanted us to go live with her, worried about my father's ability to raise children. He would have nothing of it. She ended up moving to Cleveland. He took care of us, always. And we were always foremost in his mind. He gave us Jewish educations, and it was wonderful to see that at the end of his life, he was, as Rivka says, the rabbi of the Wiles. Thank you very much, all of you, for coming and honoring him and honoring us. Rich, thanks for all the Scrabble. And more important, the intimacy. Susan, you have stood up magnificently. Dad, I hope there's a stock market in heaven and that it always goes up. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan.
And I just wanted to say one or two
Please,
words.
please.
I just wanted to thank all of you for coming today. And I also wanted to, many of you here have opened up your homes to my family when we've come to visit Dad from out of town, and I'd like to thank you for that. And also to Rich and the rabbi who helped Dad make connections at the Wiles, which was such a lovely place to live. And and he held all of you near and dear to his heart. So thank you so very much, and thank you for coming in this snow.
Very beautiful words. Thank you, Alan, very much. Thank you, Susan. As soon as we complete the traditional prayer, the God full of mercy, El Malei Rachamim, those who are more hardy and have got strong overcoats will go out to Glenville Cemetery for burial. Myer will be buried next to Marjorie, who, as I mentioned, died in, almost 70 years ago, 1954. Hard to believe. 60, maybe about 60 years ago. Those who wish, please rise. El Malei Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hamsei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, B'malos Kedoshim Utahorim, Kezorakim et Nishmat, Meir ben Yaakov Akiva ve'Esther, Shehalach le'olamo. Began Eden tehei menuchato, Anabal harachamim, Hastirehu b'seita kanafecha le'olamim, V'titzror b'tzruach chaim es nishmaso, Adonai, Adonai hunach laso, V'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo, v'nomad amen. And we say, and dear God, full of mercy, and dear God, full of compassion, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure, to the pure soul of Myer Spiro. And dear God, Master of mercy, we beseech you, remember all the loving and loyal and righteous deeds that he performed in the land of the living. May his soul be bound up in the bonds of life, and may he rest in peace. Amen. This would be the right time for those of you to put on your coats, as I will, and all are welcome to join us in the burial ceremony.
Someone's close?